Hi everybody, in this video we're going to talk about monopolists and how a monopoly decides how much of their good they're going to produce. If you remember from our chapter on perfect competition, we've tried to figure that same thing out for a company that has many competitors. Remember, a monopoly is generally the only company in an industry or it dominates its industry. A company acting under perfect competition has many competitors. So we looked at this particular chart in a past video and we talked about the idea that a company or a farmer producing wheat has many competitors. That's why it's perfect competition. So this particular farmer who's growing wheat, he might have thousands or even tens of thousands of other farmers that are growing the exact same strain of wheat that he does. And we talked about this idea, the marginal revenue under perfect competition is exactly the same regardless of the amount of units that farmer produces. So if the farmer produces 2 bushels per day, he gets $5 per bushel. If he produces 14 bushels per day, let's say, he gets $5 per unit. So that marginal revenue is exactly the same. That doesn't change under perfect competition. When we look at the statistics for monopoly, we'll actually see monopolists, their marginal revenue is affected by how much they produce because they're the only firm operating in an industry. And last time we looked and we figured out exactly how much would a company under perfect competition produce given the figures in this chart. So basically when we look at this chart, this is a range of possibilities. We're looking, well, if this farmer produces 2 bushels per day, how much money is he going to make? If he produces 14 bushels per day, how much money will he make? And given this information, we're trying to decide what would be the optimal level of production for this farmer. And we determined for this particular farmer, it was 12 units per day. And the reason was that's at the point where his marginal costs don't exceed marginal revenue. Remember, we produce up to that point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. We had that equation, MC equals MR. If our marginal cost exceed marginal revenue, that means it costs us more to produce a good than what we receive when we sell that good. So that doesn't make sense for a company to produce something if it costs more to make it than what we're getting in when we sell it. So for this particular company, when they sell 12 units, they're getting $5 per unit. That's $60 in revenue coming in. Their cost, which we're given in the problem, is $48. It cost them $4.75 a bushel. Well, they're making $12 overall. If you notice, this column here shows our economic profit. That's the highest level of profit at 12 units. So it makes sense for them to produce 12 units as opposed to 14 or 3. So this chart's helping us figure out how much that company should produce. Now, when we look at monopoly, we're going to have the same exact statistics. So the next chart we're going to look at deals with De Beers, a diamond company. And they're one of the major producers of diamonds. Basically, they're a monopolist in this particular sector of the economy. And the statistics you're going to see on that chart are very similar, but instead of 7 columns, there's going to be 8. And the one additional column, the one difference is that we're going to have a column for price. Notice we don't have any column specifically for price. Price and marginal revenue are lumped into this column here. The reason is, doesn't matter how much we produce, we're getting the same price for our good. Well, if we look at the monopolist, different idea. So now we're looking at how many diamonds are produced per day. And in this case, we go from a quantity of 0, no production at all, up to 17 diamonds produced per day. And notice the difference here. Now the price we get for each unit changes based on the level of production. So going back to the wheat farmer, if we look at his production levels, doesn't matter how much he produces, he's getting $5 per unit. Monopolist, he produces 3 units, he gets $7,000 per unit. If he produces 15, he's getting $4,000 per unit. We're making the assumption that he's selling each unit for the exact same price. So if he sells 11 diamonds, we're saying each of those 11 diamonds he sells for $5,000. He sells 2 diamonds, each of those he sells for $7,250. And the reason that the price drops as he produces more, he's the only producer. This company is the only producer of diamonds, so they affect the price in the market. What's interesting about this, that's going to actually affect the way marginal revenue is calculated, so it's not as simple for a monopolist. Notice we have in column number 4, marginal revenue is the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. Anytime you see that triangle in mathematics or economics, that's a delta sign. That means change. So the marginal revenue is showing if we produce one more unit, how much more revenue do we get in? When we looked at the example with the wheat farmer, it was really easy. We knew if he produces one more unit, he gets $5. Real simple. The problem with a monopolist is if he produces one more unit, say he goes from 3 to 4 units of production, that affects the price of all the other units being produced. Because basically we're saying if he produces 3 units, well, he's getting 7,000 a piece. If he produces 4 units, he's getting 67.50 per piece. So it has a big effect on what he's getting in total revenue based on how much he produces. So the whole thing I want you guys to keep in mind with monopoly, as they change their levels of production, the price they're getting for those units produced change. That's why our marginal revenue calculation is a little bit different. But the same idea holds. If we're asking how much should this company produce, he's going to produce until his marginal cost equals marginal revenue. If the marginal cost exceeds marginal revenue, it's a bad decision to produce at that level. And we can see here 10 units is the optimal level in this situation. So again, we're given this chart with all this information. Hypothetically, if we produce 3 units, all right, this is going to be our profit over here. If we produce 17 units, this is our profit. So we're asking ourselves, given these possible amounts of revenue we can have coming in for different levels of production, how much should we produce? And the optimal level is going to be 10 units. One way we can figure that out is to look at our total profit or loss. We can see that's the highest amount of that list. If we produce 12 units, we're making $12,500 in profit. If we produce 9, it's a little bit lower, $12,250. If we produce more units, 11, we're only making $11,750. So that's our optimal level of production. And again, we want to produce up until the point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. If marginal cost exceeds marginal revenue, we made a bad decision. We don't want to produce at that level. So in this case, with a monopolist, we keep producing up until the 10th unit. If we get to the 11th unit, at that point, our marginal cost is going to exceed the marginal revenue for producing that one extra unit. And notice when we go from that 10th to 11th unit, when we sold 10 units, we can get $5,250 a piece. When we produce that 11th unit, we're only getting $5,000. So our actual total revenue goes up when we produce 11 units. We're getting $55,000 in total revenue, as opposed to when we produce 10, we get $52,500. The difference is in our costs. The costs go up more markedly than our revenue does. All right, so that's why our profit is less. So you always want to figure out what's the greatest level of profit, and that's going to take our revenues and our cost into account. So with monopoly, it's a little more complicated. You got to keep in mind that your level of production affects the price you're going to get for your good.